In this video, we're going to take a look at a process that you can go through to draw a realistic nose. But let's first look at how people draw cartoon noses, which is really not how to draw a realistic nose. The first thing I see people do is they'll draw a little L, maybe at a diagonal. Another popular technique for drawing a nose is they'll draw the L in the opposite direction, maybe put a little nose flap on there for the nostril. Some people like to draw an upside down U and they'll put a couple of nostrils in there. These are all great cartoon noses, but remember we're looking for a realistic nose. Another popular technique is to draw a W with an extra U and maybe a couple lines for the edges of the nose. Now, these are all great cartoon noses, but remember we're looking for a way to draw a realistic nose, and sometimes it's hard to get those techniques out of your mind in order to draw one that's realistic. So let's take a look at a few things to keep in mind so that you can draw a realistic nose. The first thing you might want to do is measure the distance of the nose on the paper. So in other words, the top part of the nose where the brow line would be and the bottom portion of the nose. After you've got a good idea of where those locations are, you can draw a shape for the nose, and in this case it would be a triangular shape. Now we're going to look at a series of 4 lines. The first lines we're going to look at are the lines that happen on the inside part of the nostrils. Then we'll just simply draw those lines. So we're going to be looking at 4 lines here, and then the rest is all value. So there's our first line. Now our second line is the nostril on the other side, and very seldomly will it be a mirror image of the first nostril. Alright, the next lines we want to look at are the lines that happen on the outside portion of the nostrils. And then we'll draw the lines for the outside parts of the nostrils in our drawing. Now every nose is different, so these lines are going to be a little bit different on every person that you draw. But it's important to pay attention to these lines initially. Now that we've got our 4 lines drawn, we can consider the light sources. And in this image, we have 2 light sources originating from either side of the subject, and there's one that's originating from above as well. So this is going to affect the value or the shading that we add to the nose. We'll start right at the bottom portion of the nose, adding the shading. Now, as we're adding the value to the drawing, we want to think about 3 main areas. The highlights, where the light is hitting the object. The mid-tone areas, where we have some light hitting the object, but some areas are a little bit in shadow. And then the areas of shadow, where the value is going to be the darkest. So we're going to think about all these areas concurrently as we start adding the value. We'll start at the bottom portion, but we want to leave a little highlight right underneath the bottom tip of the nose. I'm using a General's Layout pencil number 555 for this, and I'm working on 80-pound drawing paper. That's a frequently asked question that I get. Now we're going to work right up the middle portion of the nose here, just lightly adding the shading. It's always a good idea to slowly add the shading or slowly add the value here, because we can always go darker if we need to, but it's very hard to go lighter sometimes. If you try to use an eraser to erase out areas, you can affect the texture of the surface of the paper if you're not careful. I'm trying to make marks that follow the cross contours of the nose. In other words, the marks that I make on the surface have some thought behind them. I'm not just making marks in haphazard directions. Instead, I'm trying to follow the form of the nose as I make these marks. We're going to add a philtrum here underneath the nose, and since our light source is originating from the right side, that's the side we're going to start on when we start adding the shadow. This is a little trick to help make the philtrum look a little more natural and realistic. Because the light source on the right side is stronger, there'll be darker values on the left side of the philtrum. Next, I'm going to take a blending stomp and move some of the graphite around and create some smoother transitions. As I'm making these marks with a blending stomp, I'm going to try to make circular marks. This will help move the graphite around in a more natural and even application. I'm careful not to move the graphite around everywhere on the drawing. I want to leave some areas where the white of the paper shows through. This will create a texture that's more lifelike and more like the skin texture that's found on a nose. If you don't have a blending stump, you can create one by rolling up a small piece of paper. I'm going to use a blending stump here instead of using my finger. You see, your finger has oils in it, and if you use your finger to smear the graphite on the surface, some of the oils from your finger will mix with the graphite, almost creating somewhat of a paint, which will be hard to erase and even harder to control. Now I'm going to go back with my graphite pencil and put heavier pressure and darken up some of the shadowed areas. This will further create a full range of value. It'll make the darks more intense, which will contrast with the highlight areas. I'm also going to create some textural marks on the nose to further create that illusion of skin texture. I can clean up any of the edges where things might have got a little messy, and I can darken up some of the areas underneath the nose. Here's a closer look at some of the texture that I'm adding to the nose. I'll continue to go back and forth with the blending stump and with the graphite pencil until I create an illusion that I'm pleased with. Now this particular subject has a bit of facial hair underneath the nose, so I'm going to add some marks to create the illusion of hair. I can go back and darken in a few more areas, especially around the edges of the nostrils, which will make the nose look like it protrudes a bit more, and in the cavities around the eyes. With a few last finishing touches, my drawing of a nose is complete.